The dragon prince sat alone in the highest tower of the palace, staring out at the sparkling stars. His scales shimmered in soft gold, but his heart felt heavy. Every young dragon in the empire learned to breathe fire by the age of 5, yet he could not. Smoke always escaped his nostrils, but no flames followed. It made him feel small, weak, and different. The palace was full of creatures and beings from many worlds. Dragon guards patrolled the halls with proud, fiery eyes. Scientists in shiny uniforms studied ancient scrolls and glowing machines. Flame masters practiced their skills in the training arenas. But no one could help the young prince. They all shook their heads or whispered among themselves, saying he might never be a true dragon. The prince's father, the dragon emperor, ruled with wisdom and strength. He loved his son, but even the emperor could not hide his worry. A dragon must breathe fire to lead, he had said once, his voice gentle but firm. The prince had nodded, hiding the shame that burned inside him more than any flame could. Every day the prince tried alone. He would climb to the edge of the balcony and inhale deeply. Smoke filled his mouth and nostrils. He puffed, he coughed, he tried every trick he had seen in other dragons. But still no fire. He clenched his claws and looked at the stars, wondering why he had been born this way. The other young dragons teased him sometimes, though not cruelly. They did not understand the weight of disappointment he carried. "Come on, little prince. Blow something," they would laugh. The prince forced a small smile and turned away. Deep down he felt embarrassed and lonely. One quiet evening, the prince wandered down to the lower levels of the palace. Here, the halls were darker, narrower, and full of small workers who kept the palace clean and running. Humans and aliens moved carefully, mopping floors, fixing pipes, and carrying tools. Most of them ignored the dragons, but the prince liked being here. No one stared or whispered, no one expected him to be perfect. He sat near a vent, watching the stars shine through the small windows. Smoke curled from his nostrils. He tried again. He inhaled, he exhaled, and he held his breath. Nothing. Frustration rose and he let out a long sigh. "Why can't I do it?" he muttered to himself. A soft voice answered. "Maybe you are trying too hard." The prince jumped and turned his head. A human carrying a mop and bucket smiled kindly. He had messy brown hair and clothes stained with cleaning fluid. The prince had seen him many times before, but he had never spoken to him. I don't know what else to do," the prince said quietly. His pride made his voice small. The human sat down on the floor across from him. "Sometimes things work differently than you think," he said. "Maybe fire isn't about strength. Maybe it is about control." The prince frowned. "Control? All the masters say I must have power, not control." "Power comes from control," the human said. He shrugged. "I'm just a janitor. But I have seen many things in this palace. Machines break not because they are weak, but because people don't understand them. Maybe you are like a machine." The prince tilted his head. No one had ever compared him to a machine before. No one had ever tried to understand him. The human smiled gently. "Try to breathe differently. Not harder. Not stronger. Just carefully." The prince was silent. Could it be that simple? He had spent years trying to force fire from his body. The idea of breathing carefully sounded strange. But he had nothing to lose. He nodded slowly. For the next few days, the prince returned to the lower halls to meet the human. The janitor taught him small lessons about airflow, timing, and patience. The prince listened closely. He tried, again and again, and sometimes failed. But the human never laughed or made fun. He encouraged him even when the smoke came and went without flame. Each day the prince began to feel a small change inside him. His confidence grew. He started to smile more, even at the guards and other dragons. They noticed something different about him. Something calm, something patient. One night, as the stars shimmered like diamonds outside the windows, the prince inhaled slowly, held his breath, and exhaled. A tiny spark appeared at the tip of his nostrils. His eyes widened. Smoke curled around it, but there was fire. Just a little but real. He turned to the human, who grinned proudly. "See? You just needed to breathe carefully." The prince's heart raced. For the first time he felt hope. Perhaps he could become a true dragon after all. Perhaps, with patience, even the impossible could happen. He looked up at the stars again, smoke and tiny sparks curling around him. Somewhere in the vast galaxy, other dragons might still doubt him. But here, in this quiet part of the palace, he had learned a secret. Strength alone does not make a dragon. Understanding, patience, and a little help from an unexpected friend could light even the darkest night. And so, the fireless air discovered a small but powerful truth. Sometimes the smallest voice can guide you to greatness. The human janitor moved quietly through the palace halls, pushing his mop bucket along the shiny floors. Most dragons ignored him. Most humans ignored him too. But he did not mind. He liked the quiet work and the small routines of the palace. Every day he cleaned the floors, polished the railings, and fixed small problems no one else noticed. He had noticed the young dragon prince too. The prince often came to the lower halls alone, sitting near the vents or peering out the windows. The janitor saw the smoke that curled from the prince's nostrils, and he saw the sadness in his eyes. Other workers avoided the prince, afraid of anger or magic. But the janitor never felt fear. Something about the prince made him want to help. One evening, after polishing the floors of the grand hall, the janitor spotted the prince again. He was sitting with his head resting on his claws, staring at a small vent. Smoke twisted weakly from his nose. The janitor quietly approached. "You are trying too hard," the janitor said softly. The prince lifted his head quickly, startled, but did not roar or growl. No one had ever spoken to him so calmly. I cannot do it," the prince said. His voice was low and tired. "I have tried everything. Masters, scientists, even the flame teachers. Nothing works. I am useless." The janitor shook his head. "No, you are not useless. You just need to try differently. Sometimes, it is not the strongest who succeed. It is the patient, the careful, the ones who see the small things." The prince blinked. No one ever talked to him like that. Most adults scolded him or ignored him. The janitor did not seem to care about his mistakes. He only cared about helping. "Come," the janitor said. "Sit here with me. Watch carefully." The prince hesitated but climbed onto a crate near the janitor. He watched the human mop carefully, noticing how every movement had a rhythm, how every sweep of the mop had control. The janitor's movements were simple but precise. Every corner was cleaned, every puddle gone. "Do you see?" the janitor asked. "I do not push harder. I do not rush. I control my movements. Sometimes that is all it takes." The prince frowned. "Control? That is not enough for dragons. We need power. We need fire." "Maybe," the janitor said. "But power without control can be dangerous. You have power. I can see it. But you do not have control yet." The prince looked down at the smoke curling weakly from his nostrils. Perhaps the janitor was right. Perhaps he had been trying to force fire instead of guiding it. The janitor smiled. "Let's start small. Just breathe. Do not push. Do not try to make fire. Just breathe like this." He demonstrated, breathing slowly in and out, holding the breath, releasing carefully. The prince tried to copy him. In and out. Slowly. He felt strange. It was almost like meditation, something dragons rarely did. He coughed once, then laughed softly. "This is different." "Yes," the janitor said. "Different can be good." Days passed. Every afternoon, the prince met the janitor in the lower halls. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they were silent. The janitor showed him how humans whistle, how they control airflow with their mouths and tongues. At first, the prince thought it silly. Dragons do not whistle. But he tried anyway. Slowly, the prince began to notice changes. The smoke seemed lighter. It moved differently. He felt the breath inside him in a new way. The palace scientists noticed the prince spending time in the lower halls. They frowned and whispered, "Why is he there? The janitor cannot help him." But the prince did not care. For the first time he felt hope instead of shame. One night, the janitor and the prince sat near a large window looking at the stars. "Try again," the janitor said. "Slowly. Breathe. Focus. Do not think about fire. Just think about the air, about control." The prince inhaled deeply. He held the breath. He exhaled, feeling the air move through his throat in a new way. A tiny spark appeared at the tip of his nostrils. His eyes widened. The spark grew slightly, small but real. The janitor smiled broadly. "You see? You had it in you all along. You just needed to guide it." The prince laughed, a sound full of relief and joy. No one had ever laughed like that. Not the teachers. Not the guards. Not even his father. He had felt shame for so long that joy felt like a new world. Over the next few weeks, the prince practiced every day with the janitor. The sparks grew into flames. The flames grew steady, controlled, and bright. The palace watched in awe. The fireless prince was no longer fireless. The janitor never sought praise. He continued to mop the floors and fix the small problems. But the prince never forgot him. The human had shown him something that no science or magic could: patience, observation, and the power of simple understanding. One day the Dragon Emperor walked past the lower halls. He saw his son breathing fire carefully, under the guidance of a human janitor. The Emperor's eyes shone with pride. He realized that humans, often overlooked and underestimated, could teach dragons something important. The mind is as powerful as the flame. The prince smiled at the janitor. "Thank you," he said simply. No words could explain the gratitude he felt. He had been saved not by strength, not by magic, but by a human who understood control, patience, and care. From that day forward, the prince began to change. He still practiced in the quiet halls with the janitor. He still laughed more. And he still knew deep inside that greatness often comes from unexpected places. Sometimes the smallest voices guide the largest hearts. The Dragon Prince had begun to notice small changes in himself. He could feel the movement of air inside his throat, how it traveled through his lungs, how it curled and twisted before it left his mouth. Fire sometimes flickered at the tip of his nostrils, tiny sparks dancing like stars. It was not much, but it was real. The prince felt hope again, a feeling he had not known in many years. The human janitor continued to visit him in the lower halls. They met near the vents, far from the prying eyes of guards or teachers. The janitor would sit with his mop bucket at his side, explaining small things about airflow and breath control. The prince listened, fascinated by the simplicity of human ideas. "Most dragons try to force fire," the janitor said one afternoon, leaning against a wall. "They push, they strain, they try to prove themselves. But sometimes fire is like water. It moves best when you guide it gently." The prince frowned. Fire is not water. It is power. Dragons must control power, not water. "Ah," the janitor said with a smile. "But water flows and fire can too. You just need to find the path." The prince thought about this. He had spent years trying to push, to force the flame out, yet it had never worked. Perhaps he had been thinking the wrong way. Perhaps he had been trying to fight the fire instead of letting it grow naturally. The janitor crouched down and held out his hands. "Watch me," he said. He whistled softly, a sound that curved and twisted in the quiet hall. "Notice how the air moves, how my lips and tongue guide it. Fire is similar. You must guide the air, not just push it." The prince tilted his head. Dragons did not whistle. It seemed silly at first. But something about the way the janitor controlled his breath made sense. The prince had never thought of breath in that way. Breath was just fuel for fire, not something to master in itself. The janitor smiled again. "Try it. Not fire yet. Just the air. Feel it move. Control it like you control your claws or wings." The prince inhaled deeply. He held his breath, feeling it move slowly down into his lungs. Then he exhaled, guiding it carefully with his tongue and lips, just like the janitor had shown him. Smoke curled softly from his nostrils. It felt different, softer, smoother. He tried again, and a small spark flickered at the tip of his nose. The prince's eyes widened. I think I felt it," he whispered. The janitor nodded. "Good. That is the first step. Fire will come if you continue. Control first, power later." Every day after that, the prince practiced. He did not try to impress anyone. He did not compete with other dragons. He just focused on the air, on the path of breath, on controlling it carefully. The sparks grew brighter. The smoke began to curl in steady patterns. Each attempt brought small success, and each small success brought confidence. The palace guards began to notice. "What is the prince doing?" one asked another. "He spends all his time in the lower halls talking to that human janitor." "Perhaps it is nonsense," the other replied. "But the prince seems happier." Even the scientists whispered to each other. They could not understand why a human could teach a dragon anything about fire. All their machines, potions, and experiments had failed. Yet here, in a quiet hallway, under the guidance of a simple janitor, something extraordinary was happening. One evening, the prince sat with the janitor near the largest vent in the hall. The janitor held out a small pipe. "Blow through this," he said. "Notice the control. Feel the air, not the fire. Just guide it." The prince did as he was told. Air passed through the pipe, moving in a smooth, steady flow. He guided it carefully with his tongue and lips. Smoke appeared, soft and gray. Then, suddenly, a tiny flame flickered at the tip of his nostrils. The prince gasped. I did it." The janitor laughed softly. "Not yet. That is just the beginning. Control is the first step. The rest will come with practice." The prince could hardly contain his excitement. For the first time in his life, he felt a spark of true accomplishment. Not from force. Not from magic. Not from power. From careful observation, patience, and understanding. The janitor patted his shoulder. "You have it in you. You always did. You just needed to see it differently." The prince smiled, a genuine, bright smile. He had never smiled like this in the presence of anyone before. The janitor had not only shown him a way to breathe fire, but he had also shown him hope, patience, and the value of quiet guidance. That night, the prince looked out at the stars again. He could feel the spark of fire waiting inside him, small but alive. He realized that sometimes the simplest ideas, from the smallest voices, could change the impossible into something real. And so, the Dragon Prince learned an important truth. Sometimes the power to succeed does not come from strength or magic. It comes from patience, observation, and a friend who believes in you when no one else does. The prince lay down near the vent, smoke curling gently from his nostrils, and whispered, "Thank you." The janitor only smiled, knowing the prince was on the path to greatness. In the quiet halls of the palace, a fireless dragon had begun to breathe. Not fully yet, but soon. And when he did, it would not just be fire, it would be proof that even a human's wisdom could guide the mightiest dragon. The Dragon Prince felt something stirring inside him. The small sparks he had created in the quiet halls were growing stronger. His breaths, once shaky and uncertain, were now steady and controlled. He could feel the heat gathering at the back of his throat, waiting for the right moment. Excitement mixed with nervousness. He had practiced for weeks with the human janitor, learning patience, control, and the gentle rhythm of airflow. "Are you ready?" the janitor asked one afternoon. He leaned against the wall, mop bucket at his side, smiling calmly. The prince nodded. He felt a mixture of fear and hope, but mostly hope. The janitor handed him a small pipe. "Focus on control. Forget power. Just guide the air through your throat. Do not push. Do not rush." The prince inhaled slowly. The hall was quiet, the sounds of distant palace life fading into silence. He felt the air move inside him, felt it swirl and twist just like the janitor had taught him. Smoke curled from his nostrils, gray and soft. He exhaled carefully, guiding it as gently as he could. A tiny spark appeared. It danced briefly at the tip of his nostrils. The prince's eyes widened. He held his breath and focused. Another spark appeared, then another. The sparks grew larger, brighter, until they became a small, controlled flame. The prince had never felt such a rush of joy. He was breathing fire. "Look at that," he whispered, barely able to contain his excitement. The janitor nodded. "Yes, that is the first flame. You guided it. You did it." For the first time, the prince realized what it meant to succeed not through strength or magic, but through understanding. The fire came not from forcing it, but from patience, observation, and careful control. It was a lesson he would never forget. Word began to spread quietly through the palace. Guards and workers stopped to watch as smoke and flame curled gently from the young prince's nostrils. Scientists peeked from their laboratories, unsure of what to make of it. No one had expected a fireless dragon to succeed, let alone under the guidance of a human janitor. The prince continued to practice. Each day the flames grew steadier and brighter. He learned to breathe fire in patterns, to control the size and intensity. Sparks that were once small flickers became controlled jets of flame. The palace halls were filled with smoke and light, yet there was no danger. The prince had learned control. One day the janitor clapped his hands softly. "Now try it without the pipe. Just your breath and your body." The prince took a deep breath, feeling the heat gather inside him. He exhaled slowly. Flames appeared at the tip of his nostrils. He felt the power, but he guided it with care. The fire moved in graceful curves, not wild and uncontrolled. He was finally breathing fire as a true dragon should. The palace scientists and guards who had watched from afar could not believe their eyes. The prince had done what they all thought impossible. The fireless air had become a dragon of skill and control. They whispered among themselves, realizing that human wisdom had accomplished what dragon science and magic could not. The Dragon Emperor himself came to see his son. He watched quietly as the prince practiced, flames curling and twisting in steady patterns. Pride shone in the emperor's eyes. He had feared his son might never live up to his expectations. But now he saw not just fire but mastery. The prince had learned patience, understanding, and control, qualities far more important than raw power. The prince looked at the janitor, who nodded with quiet pride. "You see," the janitor said, "you always had the fire. You just needed to guide it." The prince smiled, feeling warmth in more ways than one. It was not just the flame that filled him. It was joy, relief, and gratitude. He had learned that help could come from unexpected places, and that wisdom sometimes mattered more than strength. From that day forward, the young dragon practiced every day. He became confident, not arrogant. He played with the flames, experimenting with shapes and patterns. Other dragons began to admire him, not just for his fire but for his skill and patience. He had become a dragon that others could look up to, not because of natural talent, but because he had learned to grow, to listen, and to trust. The janitor continued his work quietly, cleaning the floors and fixing the small problems of the palace. He did not seek praise. But the prince never forgot him. He knew that without the janitor's guidance he would still be fireless, lost in shame and doubt. The human had taught him more than breathing fire. He had taught him hope, patience, and the power of careful understanding. That night, the prince sat by a window, flames flickering gently from his nostrils. Stars sparkled in the sky, reflected in his golden scales. He thought about how small actions, patient guidance, and unexpected friendships could change even the impossible. He realized that being a dragon was not just about power, it was about wisdom, control, and learning from those who others might overlook. For the first time, the fireless heir felt truly complete. He had found his fire not by force but by learning, listening, and trusting. And he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he could face them with patience, courage, and the quiet strength he had discovered with the help of a human janitor. The first flame had been lit. And with it, the Dragon Prince's future burned brighter than any star in the galaxy. The Dragon Prince had finally learned to breathe fire. His flames were steady, controlled, and bright. The sparks he once struggled to produce now danced at his command, curling and twisting in graceful patterns. Every corner of the palace that had once doubted him now watched in quiet awe. Yet the prince did not boast. He knew the secret of his success: patience, observation, and the guidance of a human janitor. The janitor continued his quiet work, moving through the palace halls with mop and bucket. Guards and scientists had begun to notice him, but few understood why he mattered. To most, he was just a human, small and simple. But to the prince, he was the reason he had fire, the reason he had hope, and the reason he had learned to believe in himself. One morning, the Dragon Emperor summoned the prince and the janitor to the grand hall. The hall was filled with dragons, humans, and other beings from across the empire. Everyone had heard whispers about the prince's success. They wanted to see the fire, to see the magic that humans could not create. The prince stepped forward, calm but proud. He inhaled deeply, guiding his breath carefully. Smoke appeared first, curling like soft clouds. Then a small flame danced at the tip of his nostrils. He moved it gently, shaping it into a spiral, then into a flickering star. Flames leapt and twirled, bright against the polished floors of the hall. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Scientists whispered, guards nodded in surprise, and other dragons watched with admiration. No one had ever seen a young dragon breathe fire with such precision and care. They could sense the difference. This was not power forced. This was mastery. The Dragon Emperor stepped forward. His golden scales shone in the sunlight streaming through the windows. "My son," he said, his voice proud and steady, "you have learned not just to breathe fire but to master it. You have shown patience, focus, and courage. You are ready to lead." The prince bowed his head, acknowledging his father's words. Then he turned to the janitor. "I could not have done this without him," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "He showed me how to guide my breath, how to find control, and how to believe in myself." A murmur ran through the crowd. The janitor, humble as ever, looked embarrassed. He had never sought recognition. He only wanted to help. But the emperor raised his claw, signaling the crowd to silence. "Today," the emperor said, "we recognize not only the Dragon Prince's achievement but also the value of those who guide, teach, and inspire. Humans, once overlooked, have wisdom that even dragons can learn from. Let this day mark a new understanding across our empire." The janitor's eyes widened. No one had ever spoken like this about humans before. He had been small, ignored, and underestimated, yet here he stood, acknowledged by the mightiest dragon and the emperor himself. The prince walked to the janitor and bowed deeply. "You have changed my life," he said simply. "I will never forget your guidance." The janitor smiled, quietly proud. "You had it in you all along. I just helped you see it." From that day forward, humans in the empire were no longer overlooked. Their intelligence, patience, and insight were valued. Other dragons began to seek their advice. The janitor continued his work in the palace, but now he was respected, admired, and often consulted. He never stopped being humble, yet his influence quietly shaped the empire. The Dragon Prince grew stronger, wiser, and more confident. He learned that true strength was not just in fire or claws, but in understanding, patience, and the ability to listen. He continued to practice with the janitor, refining his fire, exploring new techniques, and discovering the joy of learning together. Every night, the prince would sit by the stars, flames flickering gently around him. He remembered the long days of doubt, the moments of fear, and the times he had thought he would never succeed. But he also remembered the quiet guidance of the janitor, the lessons about breath, control, and patience. Those lessons had changed him more than any magic or power could. The palace was no longer just a place of dragons. It had become a place of learning, cooperation, and respect for all beings, big and small, dragon and human alike. The empire began to grow stronger not just through power but through understanding. And the prince? He became a dragon worthy of legend, not for the flames he could command, but for the wisdom, humility, and kindness he carried in his heart. The fireless heir was no longer fireless. He was a leader who knew that greatness could come from the most unexpected places, and that even the smallest voice could guide the mightiest heart. In the quiet of the palace, near the vents and the lower halls where they had first met, the prince and the janitor smiled at each other. No words were needed. Fire danced softly in the prince's nostrils, and pride glimmered quietly in the janitor's eyes. Together they had shown the galaxy that strength alone does not define greatness. Understanding, patience, and friendship do. The Dragon Prince had fire at last. But more importantly, he had learned that true power lies in recognizing the value of others, even those who seem small, quiet, or ordinary. And in doing so he changed not only himself but the entire empire. The stars outside the palace sparkled, reflecting the flames within the prince and the bright future that awaited the Dragon Empire, guided by wisdom, patience, and the quiet courage of humanity.